Dumas begins The Three Musketeers with D'Artagnan bumping into his three friends. I mean, literally bumping into them. In fact, he insults them accidentally in such a way that the book starts by having all three of them challenge him to a duel. He bumps into one of their shoulders, Athos's shoulder, and causes him great pain. He then embarrasses Aramis over a lady, and then he gets tangled up in Porthos's cape. See, Porthos was a very proud person. He wanted to project an image of being well-to-do, and so he bought this very fancy, expensive gold inlaid suit. But he could only have the inlay on the front because he couldn't afford the whole thing. And so he wore this big cape to cover up the fact that the gold was only on the front. So when D'Artagnan gets rushing and gets tangled up in the cape, everybody knows that Porthos has been sort of putting on airs and trying to make people think that he was doing a lot better than he is. Well, we've got our own version of that, right? It's called social media, where we sort of craft a persona to let people think that our life is going a whole lot better than it is. You know, nobody takes selfies of themselves all sweaty out cutting the grass. Although we do that, we always try to portray ourselves. And in fact, that comes back to bite us sometimes. How many times do you suddenly find out that somebody you thought was doing great has gotten a divorce? Suddenly, out of the blue. Well, it doesn't take suddenly out of the blue. That's been building for a long time. The old song tells us breaking up is hard to do. That's been a degeneration over a long period of time. The problem is that most couples want to portray an image that they're doing fine when they're not doing fine at all. In fact, perhaps if they would spend some of the energy that they use to project an image of doing okay and infuse that energy into making the relationship better, they would have been far ahead in the game. Jesus warns us to be sure not to spend our energy projecting a spirituality that is greater than what we have. He says in Matthew 6 and verse 1, "Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven." He's talking, of course, about the Pharisees who had this image of being so pious and holy. And it was an image that was well-deserved. Many of them were very spiritual people, and they were known by that and respected by the people. The problem was there is always the pressure, because people do look up to you, because people do perceive you in a certain way, to sort of project that image maybe a little more brilliantly, a little more brightly than it truly is. And so they would go out of their way to project that kind of image. And Jesus warns his disciples not to fall into that trap. So when you give, he says, don't be like the hypocrites who blow a trumpet, make sure everybody is watching so that they give alms to the poor. Now the poor person receives the gift and it helps them, but Jesus says that being seen by others, that's the only reward that the hypocrite is going to get. And when you pray, don't be like the hypocrites who make sure they're standing on the street corner with their arms in the air and their voices projecting so that people can hear their eloquent prayers. The only reward they get is being seen because God is not listening. And when you fast, he says, don't make sure everybody knows it. Don't whiten your appearance and look gaunt so everybody knows, oh, they've gone all day without food. He said, now take care of yourself so that the only one that knows you're fasting is God himself. Don't try to project something that is not truly you. And that brings us to our look at the 7 churches of Asia. For this morning, we've been looking at these churches that Jesus begins the book of Revelation writing to, these letters that have to do with struggles and problems going on at these churches. And we're ready for the 5th one, the city of Sardis. And the problem at Sardis was you had a lot of people that projected an image of everything is going well when it wasn't going well at all. Their reputation outstripped the reality. And Jesus warns them to take heed to that and to make some changes. So let's read the text together, and then we'll have some things to say about it. Revelation 3, verses 1 through 6.
To the angel of the church in Sardis, these are the words of him who holds the 7 spirits of God and the 7 stars. I know your deeds. You have a reputation of being alive, but you are dead. Wake up, strengthen what remains and is about to die, for I have found your deeds unfinished in the sight of my God. Remember, therefore, what you have received and heard. Hold it fast and repent. But if you do not wake up, I will come like a thief, and you will not know at what time I will come to you. Yet you have a few people in Sardis who have not soiled their clothes. They will walk with me dressed in white, for they are worthy. The one who is victorious will, like them, be dressed in white. I will never blot out the name of that person from the book of life, but will acknowledge that name before my Father and his angels. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches.
The city of Sardis is kind of a study in miniature of the problem that is represented in the church at Sardis. Sardis was once a very opulent and wealthy city. It was the capital of the Lydian Empire. You might have heard the expression, rich as Croesus. Well, Croesus was the king of Sardis, that ruled over the Lydian Empire. Herodias says that it was first at Sardis that they started using gold coins, that Sardis was so opulent that their exchange was in gold coins. Well, that was history by the time the New Testament was written. The Lydian Empire and Sardis had fallen to the Persians and then to Alexander the Great and finally to the Romans. There was an earthquake in 17 AD that destroyed the entire city. And now the city had been built back up, but it was nothing like what you would have expected, what the reputation, hearing about King Croesus and the great Lydian Empire. Sardis was only a shell of its normal self. I remember when we would go to Arkansas, go to Delight, where my mom was from. We traveled this little country road that went from Arkadelphia to Texarkana. About halfway in between was Delight, where my mom was from. And there was a little town that was really more than a collection of old broken down houses and a old country store, and it was named Hollywood, Arkansas. And we would always joke about, well, that's just not how I thought Hollywood would look like. I've always heard about Hollywood. Well, people that visited Sardis might think, well, I've always heard about Sardis, but this isn't all that impressive. Well, Jesus said that's the problem that they have in the church. You have a reputation. I know your deeds, he says. You have a reputation of being alive, but you were dead. So the church at Sardis had this reputation. Perhaps it had once been a live and vibrant church, but now Jesus says the reality doesn't match the reputation. And we might ask, reputation with whom? Well, it might have been with other churches. See, there are a couple of things that Jesus mentions in some of the letters that aren't mentioned in this letter. False teachers aren't mentioned. Concessions to paganism aren't mentioned. Those are mentioned as significant problems in some of the other 7 churches. But maybe other churches looked at Sardis, and because they didn't have those issues, maybe they had the reputation of being alive, but they weren't really. Jesus says, I know your deeds. Or maybe the reputation was with the city of Sardis. You know, sometimes churches do have a good reputation in the city. We know that the Jerusalem church, we're told they had the favor of all the people, largely because of the way they took care of their poor. But here, maybe the reputation was with the city because they fit in way too well. They didn't cause too much of a stir. You see, one of the problems that are mentioned in other churches aren't mentioned here, persecution. Maybe the church in Sardis fit in too well with their city for the city to bother persecuting them. They weren't any different from the city. But whatever the reason, the fact was their reputation outstripped the reality. They had the name of being alive, but they were dead. And so Jesus is going to have two messages that he's going to give to the church. Two different things he's going to say. He's going to speak to the church in the main, those that were causing or part of the problem, and then he's going to speak to those who are still faithful, because there were faithful people still in this church. So what he says to the church is, wake up, strengthen what remains and is about to die, for I have found your deeds unfinished in the sight of my God. They needed to wake up and stop living in the past, stop resting on their reputation, and get back doing the things they needed to do. It wasn't that they needed to start some new programs or to get some more activity going. It was more important than that. They needed to step back and remember what was most important. They needed to wake up and live up to what they said they believed. He goes on to say in verse 3, but if you do not wake up, I will come like a thief, and you will not know at what time I will come to you. See, this is a deadly disease, the disease of ease. They, living in the past and on their reputation, if they didn't wake up and recommit themselves to what they said they believed, then it was going to be too late. He says he will come for them at a time when they did not know. Now, we ask the question here, so what is it that was the real problem at Sardis? What was it that was causing this tendency to kind of lean on the reputation and take things easy and not be as serious about living the Christian life as they were about talking about it? Well, John Stott, in his book on Revelation, suggests that it may have been one of two things. Maybe it was nominal Christians, those that were Christians in name only. They said they believed the things about Christ, and they affiliated with the church, but they really didn't live out the things that they said they believed. They just were Christians in name only. I heard it said once that people in the Middle Ages only took 3 baths in their lifetime. When they were born, when they were married, and when they died. So when they were hatched, matched, and dispatched. That's the only time that they bathed. The problem was, that was the only time they also went to church. When they were born to be christened, when they got married in the church, and then when they had their funeral. And there are folks like that today. I heard somebody say one time, I exercise religiously 2 or 3 times a year. Christians who go to church only on Easter and Christmas and maybe when their family's visiting from out of town. They're Christians and they want their names on the roll, but they're Christians in name only. So perhaps at Sardis there were some folks that were Christian in their identification. Maybe they had been Christians for a generation or two, but they really didn't make much of an attempt to live out what they said they believed. And then maybe at a little bit deeper level, there were the hypocrites. Those that went to a great deal of trouble to be at church every week. It's just that was the only time that they made any effort at living the Christian life. They were hypocrites. And you're probably aware of the fact that the word hypocrite comes from the Greek dramas and comedies and tragedies. Actors were hypocrites. They played a part. And in Greek drama, the actors wore masks so they could actually play 2 or 3 different characters. They would just change masks. And so the hypocrite is one who puts on a mask and pretends to be something that they are not. I mentioned this in passing. This has happened several times in the past, where a family shows up and there's a young person with them, and the young person goes to a great deal of trouble trying to pretend like they know everybody in church. But what's happened is they're here, maybe working their first job. They moved away from home the first time, perhaps in college, or in the military, perhaps. And they want mom and dad to think really, they want to convince mom and dad they come to church all the time. But the only time that they come is when mom and dad comes for a visit. And sometimes people go to a lot of trouble to act like faith is much more important to them than it is. And so what Jesus says to this church is you need to wake up and to recommit yourselves to what you say you believe. You have this great reputation with whoever of being alive, but you have allowed yourself to shrivel and die. And if you don't wake up, there are going to be eternal consequences. Your church is not even going to be a church anymore. So it's not that you need to start a bunch of new programs, it's that you need to recommit yourself to what you say is important. You need to wake up and rise from the dead. Now he speaks to a different group of people later in this short letter, and he speaks to those who are faithful. And what he tells them basically is to keep on being faithful. So he says in verse 4, "Yet you have a few people in Sardis who have not soiled their clothes. They will walk with me dressed in white, for they are worthy." So you have this dead church that has a reputation for doing things well, but they're dead and they have to wake up. And if they don't wake up, Jesus is going to come, and he's going to come, apocalyptically. He's going to come for them to destroy them. But there's a group of folks that are faithful. And he says they are worthy. They are going to they walk with me, so they are going to walk with me. Now it's interesting what Jesus doesn't say to this group of faithful people in this dead church. He doesn't say, well, you need to leave that church and place your membership in a better church. That's the tendency that we've had historically, right? If the church that you're a member of isn't working out, then you go find another church, or you go start your own church. Pull away. Now, that's not an option that a lot of people take because there's a lot of work to do that. But if maybe what you need to do is start a movement, an underground movement in the church to seize control, gain power, and take over the church so you can institute the changes. He doesn't say any of that. He just tells them to be faithful. The unfaithfulness, the lethargy, the deadness of the church does not impact them or their salvation. You can be a faithful Christian in an unfaithful church. Now, is there ever a reason to leave a church and find a new one? Well, yes, but if we're having problems in our family, mom and dad just aren't working out. There's the kids just, driving you nuts. I was pausing for the amen, but I guess not. Do you go find a new family? Or do you try to make things work in the family that may be a little dysfunctional? Yeah, there are good reasons to find a new church, one that you fit in better with and can serve better in. But that's not what Jesus tells these Christians to do. He says, because you see what Jesus wants in the church at Sardis, he wants there to be renewal. He wants there to be revival. And you can't do that if all the faithful churches go, all the faithful Christians go and place membership at Smyrna or Philadelphia or one of the churches that are deemed faithful. No, he wants them to remain faithful and to be the nucleus on which he can build a new and more alive church. This old story about a guy named Bill. Graduated from high school, he got a job being a bag boy in a grocery store. And he kept that job for 50 years. He wasn't all that good at it, but it was the only thing that he could do. And so every day for 50 years, he would go and bag groceries at the grocery store. And so finally he dies, and somebody comes to the new owner of the grocery store and asks him, so are you going to fill Bill's vacancy at the store? And the owner said, well, to tell you the truth, Bill didn't leave much of a vacancy. Maybe that's a goal that we need to have as Christians, to live the Christian life in such a way as that there's a vacancy when we're gone. I remember Patrick Mean talking about a guy coming to him, and most groups of elders or preachers have had this happen. The guy comes to him after church one day and says, I just want you to know, Patrick, this is going to be the last day we're going to be here. Me and my family, we're going to go, we're going to find us a new church, a better church. This church just isn't just meeting our needs. He goes through the normal litany. We're just not being fed by your sermons. And then he says, and on top of that, we've been gone for a month and nobody has called us to check on us. Now, it'd be good if somebody would have called and checked on them, but Patrick turns it around and says, you got to be kidding. You've been gone for a month and there was nothing vital here at the church that didn't get done because you were gone? I mean, you could stay gone for a month and no one missed you were gone because there was nothing that wasn't being done that you did? Maybe that's a reminder to us that involvement at church works both ways. Yeah, we can sort of slip away and not be missed, but if we're engaged and involved, then we make ourselves kind of, well, this morning, let me just share an experience. 5 minutes before church started this morning, the light went on. So I interrupted Tony Briggs, thought he was in the middle of a conversation, pulled him aside, and I said, Tony, can you play the part of Kenyatta Daly this morning? Because there's nobody to make sure the baskets gets passed out, nobody to make sure things go okay in the foyer here. So Kenyatta was missed. I mean, if I had to have that brainstorm, we really would have been missed when it was time for the baskets and there was no baskets to be placed. We can allow ourselves to so sleepwalk through our faith that we really leave no vacancy. And maybe our relationship to the Lord, our relationship to the church, our relationship with other Christians don't really leave a vacancy in our lives when we suddenly realize that they're not there. To this church, Jesus says, wake up, as we're getting ready to sing. Wake up, O sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. This nominal Christianity, this being a Christian in name only, that's not going to be enough. Certainly playing it being a Christian, coming to church and praying the prayers, not that doesn't work. That does work, by the way. It works to fool other Christians. We can't see into each other's hearts, and we can play on the outside and project. But Jesus is telling us that's just being dead without realizing that you're being dead. He challenges us to wake up and to live out what we say we believe, the songs that we've sung this morning, the scriptures that we've listened to, the reenactment of the Christ story and the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ that we went through in communion. Live that like we believe that that's true, because we do believe it's true, don't we? So we need to wake up and get back to living that. So as we sing this next song that challenges us to wake up, let's commit ourselves this week to roust ourselves if we've gone a little bit lax, to rise from the dead. Christ promises that he will be there to give that life to us.